the thing about the shadow side of things is you have to go back to remembering what the point that was made in the first set is that these shadow aspects are only something that could open up to what could be the best of this side too. And it's a misuse of, a misapplication, an overemphasis of, or something that's making it so that it becomes a shadow rather than the power of. And so as we look at this shadow side, what we really want to do is look at what it is that we can do to maximize what causes the problem, even what could cause a problem, so that we don't take those slight steps to the side, or that hiding of which makes it so that we become the negative. Okay, so here's the shadow side of a healer. So there's 4 addictions that she points out: intensity, perfection, the need to know, and what is not working. Anybody have any of those addictions in you?
Yeah.
All of them.
Raising hand.
Yeah. Especially because if you're pretty responsible and if you're American, some of those come almost guaranteed with the territory, don't they? So let's talk about each one. Intensity. Intensity is a really good thing. The problem is that intensity sometimes takes away. If you look over on this side over here, it takes away from love. Because when you get too intense about something, you forget about relationship.
True.
And so if in the midst of the really important work that I'm doing, if I remember that who I'm working with is a human being, not just something to be healed, something to be fixed, something to pad my resume because I've done one more good thing with a person, if I remember that it is really truly a person, it helps a lot. What makes it so that you forget to remember relationship? What gets in your way of that?
Well, I would say for me, it's when I think everything's about me.
I thought it was, Mike.
Guess who's laughing?
Right. But you're right that if I'm being very intense, it's usually because look how important my job is. Look, I've got to fix this. Look, here's this person who depends on me. Right?
And what happens is you stop listening.
You stop listening. Yeah. Yeah. You stop relating. You stop seeing a human being.
Well, he's been a good human doing today.
Yeah. Yeah. And that human doing is something we all have been taught way too well. Haven't we? In America, we emphasize doing easily, often to our own detriment as well as to the detriment of everything around us.
Well, where is it in scripture it says, by your works you will be known?
That's
On the
in
other hand.
James. Yeah. Yeah.
No.
Yep.
You will be known, but not necessarily admired.
Or
Thank
maybe,
you, Judy.
or maybe even liked.
That's true. I was thinking about years ago, a friend of mine admitted to being addicted to excitement, which I think may be the same thing as intensity,
Yeah.
in the sense that if a relationship was getting too calm, he or she would pick a fight just to get things livened up. And it was like, really? I don't think that's necessarily the way to go, but.
Right. But Joni and I have been watching a TV show called New Amsterdam. And one of the characters is chief of the emergency department. And the storyline is how she's addicted to a painkiller because she's got things that need to be healed within her. But of course, she's too busy. She's doing all this stuff. She's fixing all these people. So she's trying to be the healer, but at the same time, she's falling further and further away from the human that she is. And if we're trying to heal in a non-human way, and I don't mean heal ourselves, but heal each other, we'll do it less well than what we ought to. Healing happens best when humans relate to humans.
Yeah, which is hard right now.
It is, isn't it? And
It's
and
also
and especially in some of those areas where it's not me or you that's broken, it's the space between us or the systems that are dividing us and all of that. If I can't be human in that space and allow you to be human, that those rifts will never be healed, will they?
No, that's true.
I think there's also the example where people could be intensely so much into a belief system,
Yeah,
which is happening a lot, that you're more intense about your belief system than you are about relationships or anything else.
yeah, absolutely. And that kind of pulls down to the second one, which is perfection. And sometimes when we're looking at perfection, what we're trying to say is, well, you got to have every single belief exactly perfect, which by that I mean exactly like me, right? And that tendency to emphasize that need for perfection sometimes doesn't help us in what's most important in that moment. Am I in that moment with a human being, or am I trying to make them into the robotic perfection?
Well, in your synopsis for Sunday's commentary, you mention Mormonism. You don't say that word, but that's what your prior religion is, walking around with this intensity and belief and perfection that it is the way and it is the only way, and I want you to hear about it.
Yeah.
All else aside, that perfection, I need to follow the steps, as it were. Everything needs to be the same again and again and again.
Yeah.
And you walk past the man who needs shoes.
And you walk past the man who needs shoes. For whatever reason, you defined him outside of your view, right?
Yes.
I remember something one time that I learned that early Christians called the path was called the way.
The way. That's right.
Right.
And so if I divert from the way, I could feel like I'm a sinner, or I'm wrong, or you're wrong,
Yeah.
or we are all wrong.
Yeah.
The way was be the right way.
Yeah.
And we get all tangled up in the language and the confusion of what the different words imply.
Yeah. But that's why I like that sense of us calling something the only, the right, the perfect,
Yeah.
takes us away from something that's really important. Did you see what he said was the human resource to be able to battle this? It is power and excellence. Now, both of those are amazing words, right? To have a life of power, to have a life of excellence, can do incredible things in the world. They may not be perfect, but to have those things in your interaction can bring about a lot of perfection. So it's not like in all these things, if you're loving, there's often intensity, right? It's not like you're not trying to have many of the qualities of what these addictions are. It's that you're not giving into the negative side of them, right? So the need to know here, that's essentially a need that says, I need to know everything. I need to have the answer to every question that's out there. I need to, instead of being in a space of wisdom where you're more discerning from all the imperfect bits of information you have, how to walk as well as possible. But how many have been taught that you need to know everything? That you need to have every answer.
Mike, you want to talk to this?
I get accused of that. I get accused of that frequently.
Frequently.
Because I'm uncomfortable if I don't understand something.
Yeah.
Or if it makes me feel fearful, or something that is unexplained. For instance, I could say, "What do you mean by that?" Or "What's the implication of that word or that behavior?"
Yeah.
Those are questions, I think. Are those quite the same intention there?
Well, the answer could be maybe, right? Depending on how you're asking those kinds of questions, or how the other person is hearing how
That's
you're
right.
asking those kinds of questions,
That's right.
right? How we are in those human interactions can change something from being an addiction to being a spot of resource.
And so the way that the question is asked can be taken sometimes as a challenge or sort of an aggressive action rather than a "I need to know."
Yeah, yeah. Or the way an answer is given. Can you be the wise counselor that's saying, "Here's some resource for you if it helps," or are you saying, "You better do it this way," right? That's a whole different way to approach it. Because the piece of advice you're trying to give to the person could be exactly the same in both those cases,
Yeah, I suppose.
but how it's delivered or how it's received as well could be very different. I think the fourth one of these is kind of important too. The diction is to what is not working. Do we have that aspect to us that looks more at the negative, the deficits, the problems, or do we have some sense of the vision of what, in the midst of what is wrong as well as what is right, the vision of what can be? And are we healing in ourselves and in the other person towards something, not just fighting against something bad that we see in? Does that make sense? If all I'm trying to do is get someone to stop drinking alcohol, often what I develop is a dry drunk.
Yeah.
Who doesn't leave behind any of the addictive behaviors, even if they're not drinking. And how often do we do that? Go ahead, Mike.
I think this is so consuming anybody who's a progressive person these days.
Yeah.
We just cannot stop talking about what's going wrong with the culture that we're in and the way things are behaving and the fears we have. And it's overriding, and it's people are, sometimes I'm in one group that said we can talk about anything but that one overriding subject.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really hard, isn't it? Because no matter how much I see a problem here, if the other person right now is not looking at that problem, it may not help at all trying to fix that with them. They have to be able to see that. Right? And we may be absolutely true, absolutely right in knowing what the issue is completely. But it's not just about us being right. It's about them discovering and moving forward with us in some way or another. And so it takes being in that relationship first of all. Now, I'm pretty good at always maximizing my relationships, but you guys need a lot of help in that.
He just buys one.
Maximizing my relationships. Wow.
So of these four addictions, which one do you think is the one that's hardest for you and why? Where do you fail more often?
For me, probably perfection is the one that comes most immediately to mind. And I don't know, I think that has to do with control also, just thinking that you've got the best way to do something, and people who don't know how to do it your way just don't know how to do it.
Yeah. It's tough when there's a whole bunch of people that are not as good at something as you, huh?
Yeah. And they don't really want to learn to be as good as the way you want them.
Well, Meg, I think I can relate to that perfection because I see it in others better than I see it in myself. But I do see when, you know, you ask somebody to do something for you, expect them to do it the way you've always done it.
Right.
And to be able to do it well and get the right, what you expect the results to be. But in fact, that's not what's going to happen. If you, you know, if you ask for help, you can't expect it to be perfect the way you would do it. And there, I struggle with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, you know, an obstacle to building a relationship because you hesitate to, I guess, delegate is kind of the wrong word, but you know what I mean, like to offer or to ask someone to do something for you because you don't feel that they're going to do it the way you would do it, and it won't be done as well. So you don't really open up the opportunity for them to learn, or for you to learn how they would approach doing something differently from the way that you would. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you exhaust yourself trying to override that,
Yeah.
or to ride on that issue. Yeah.
And
Perfect.
oh, go ahead.
Thanks. Perfection has also been a real issue for me. And one part is that there is that sense of control. And there's that sense, if I just keep trying harder and do things more perfect, then it'll all work out.
Yeah.
And I've realized that I have to slow down and not be as hard on myself, because I'll see somebody else do something and it's not perfect. And it's like, it's so much easier for me to have compassion for that other person than it is for me when I do something and it's not perfect.
I will say, Siri, that to some degree, it's the messages that we've given in our society specifically to your gender. Sometimes we have talked to the women in our society in ways that give them unfair expectations of how life should be. And so what I'm saying is you might be coming by it honestly. Even if it's not perfect, even if it's not a good trait, it may not be just your fault.
Yeah, that's a good point. And of course, I remember my mom at some point looking up to Doris Day and saying, and literally saying to me, I want to be like her. But then, of course, you know, nobody can be like Doris Day was in the movies or on TV, because I'm sure probably Doris Day wasn't like that.
That's right. Almost certainly. She probably did at least some of those movies in more than one take.
Yeah, that's true.
I was going to say that probably throughout my life, there's been bits and pieces of all four addictions: intensity, perfection, the need to know what is not working. But something new, I want a fifth one, something new is emerging, especially during the pandemic. I've had months of quiet time and lots of time out in nature. And something new is emerging. And so I don't know. So I'm not fitting in neatly into the list.
Yeah.
But something good is emerging. Quiet, lots of quiet is really good for my soul, my heart, my personality. Lots of quiet.
And that's going to be part of what we're going to talk about in just a second too, because part of what we have to do is go back to what helps us be better healers. And part of that better healers is some of that quiet, not hearing just my own voice one more time, but hearing something different. So what I've done, Sarah, because of what you just said, I put this in place for you. That now that there's another space here, right? That there's other ways we can not be perfect as a healer. And as you define that more, let me know. Right? Because chances are if you can have that addiction, that at least somebody else around this circle will have that same type of struggle.
So actually, I'm not feeling any of those addictions right now, but I have in my life. So on the other side of the question mark, there's some strength and new quality emerging.
Which is a really good thing. And we need to remember that those addictions of each of these leads us to that which could be amazing. If we take it that slight turn away from where it becomes dysfunctional. Intensity itself is not wrong, right? We want an intensity in our relationships, but not an unhealthy intensity, right? We want it to truly be love, not just heightened feelings, heightened emotion, right?
So passion could be good.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mary. So passion, intensity, passion, excitement, commitment, willingness could come out of intensity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so just think about all of those things. How do we move towards, listen to these words. Aren't these all wonderful words? Love, power, excellence, wisdom, vision. All of those things are great ways to be able to be in relationship, and especially in a healing relationship, right? So how do we make sure that we stay on this side of without slipping over towards these things?
I'd like to add something to this, because I think that there is a dark side to the word addiction that draws a negativity. And if we put two words just in front of each one of those things,
yes,
too much intensity causes loss of the other side. Too much intensity to perfection causes too much need to know. All of those things creates a way to turn this into not that terrible addiction, but a healing. Because it leads me in a direction of progress. And it opens up my consciousness to what's really going on.
Nice. I like that. So here's how I've modified it. So addiction, too much of whatever it is.
Right. I think that's what you were trying to say.
Yeah. Right? So, and so it's an ongoing thing. So to be able to do that, then it carries us back to all the things that are best about this. What are the tools that we have as we do this? And here's what they call the empowerment tools of the healer, which is where I want to spend most of the rest of the time here today. If we come back to these types of things, it will help us to be in a better relationship to those possible addictions that could be a resource waiting to be claimed. So the first one that she talks about, and she kind of shifts these two together, but she talks about storytelling. How we have to be workers of a story that allows a shift to happen, a change to happen in how we or the other person views things. So part of it is a story that I'm telling myself about that person that is looking for healing. But part of it is, how do I talk to that person in a way that allows them to see themselves and whatever it is that's afflicting them, how do I help them to see it differently? And how many have ever gotten into the space where you already have the right answer and you don't need to any longer hear a story? So you're busy telling somebody something that has no meaning in the moment, or has less meaning than what you think it does. And you need to tell a different story to yourself or for that other person. But do you remember the person who somehow changed your perspective just enough, told you the right story, to be able to change your view of yourself and of the thing you were facing? So that
Some of the most
suddenly,
impressive leaders that I encountered were so skillful at telling a story, an unrelated story that had a message that
Yeah.
I needed to hear.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And if we're going to be good, healers, then we have to be able to both hear and tell stories, because part of storytelling is listening enough that that whatever you're saying is speaking into the story that they're already speaking, right? And extending that they've already voiced. So if I'm looking at Judy and I'm thinking well, she needs to fix this, when in reality she's thinking this thing over here, then whether or not I'm right about this needing to be fixed about her, I'm not hearing that, and so she's not going to be able to hear the healing that I'm giving, because I'm not speaking to the hurt she's talking about. So my story has to be part of her story.
But there's also the aspect of retelling our own stories
Uh-huh.
and how those change as we grow and as our focus changes.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to hear that, that difference, and to honor that for ourselves and for other people when we're listening to their story, knowing that it's not necessarily finished.
Right. Right.
They may be telling the story of what they're working on. And if we go back to perfection for just a minute, first graders taught me to just give up on perfection. Just no matter how meticulously I planned. In fact, the more meticulously I planned, the worse the week went. There was just no way, although there was a teacher down the hall who had her kids lined up in straight lines the first day of school. It was hard. But one of the things I miss in my life right now are small people to keep me on track about perfection's not the goal necessarily. At any rate, I'm always grateful for them. But also in my classroom, it was hard sometimes not to focus on what was not working.
Yeah.
And to give all my energy to the kids who were struggling, or
Yes.
to something that I was supposedly required to be teaching, and it just wasn't going.
Yeah.
And I would lose sight of the bigger picture for the individual or for the whole class, or for myself as a teacher, that one bad year didn't make my whole career. Although while I was in the bad years, it felt like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the hard part is, Judy, is that we have lots of right answers. Like in first grade, there's lots of ways of how you're supposed to write or how you're supposed to put things together. But I'll bet you had at least one or two good kids who did most everything right, but never figured out how to hold their pencil correctly. And every first grade teacher knows the right way to hold that pencil, and they know that those kids are going to struggle. But they were still pretty good kids anyway, weren't they?
Absolutely.
And it's easy for us to get caught up in that flaw instead of moving into that larger story and remembering that.
The kids who could read polysyllabic names of dinosaurs, but couldn't spell for a hoot.
Yeah. It's a crazy thing, huh?
Yep, things that didn't mesh. was really fun.
Sometimes we do that in the church, that we end up focusing on who's making the most noise and who really needs the most help or seems to need the most help. And then because we feel it's an important thing that God wants us to do, to pay attention to the least among us,
Yeah.
that we then forget about the rest of the people.
Yeah.
And I mean, it can happen at the other end. You can pay too much attention to the top, and there's a tricky balance, but I find myself wanting to go immediately as a pastor to where somebody needs help.
Yeah. I heard a really good term in seminary that I think is pretty applicable to all of us. And it's the term identified patient. You go into a family and they look at you and say, she's the problem. And they all point the same direction.
Yeah.
Right? Which tells you almost certainly that she's not the only problem. Right? So where is it that they're telling a story? Where is it that that person's telling a story that's really diverting the attention from something else that needs to be seen better? And how do you tell the story differently so that they move beyond the one they already know?
Reframing, renaming.
Yep. But that's what storytelling is about.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And journeying, the next part of it, which is another aspect of storytelling, is an important aspect. Journey is about travel. It's about moving from whatever point that you find yourself right now towards something. And maybe helping that person to, instead of going down this track, which was the only one they saw, to be able to see that there's a different pathway. And lovingly and invitingly helping them to step into that different place that they hadn't seen before.
And what happens if they don't take the bait?
They won't always. That's the hard part, Lauren. And it helps if you realize that there's not a singular way to be able to solve a problem. One of the nice things that she did when she talked about the journeys is she talked about 3 different types of dream works, right? The types of things that we saw. I think I have a slide for that. Hold on just a second. Yeah, she talked about how we have these ascendancy myths, right? Where we move towards a place that's more the outside of of what we expect. It's the magical world, but it's something that allows us to vision differently. But we also have those descendancy myths, which allow us to find partners on the path that maybe we hadn't had before. Both of those are good things to be able to do. And I may be trying to tell you an ascendancy myth where what you're doing is saying, I need a friend to walk with me. And so they're telling themselves a different story. So sometimes their rejection, even in their rejection, you as a healer can find what it is that they're trying to hear. So when I went through one of my most important times of healing and changing and becoming, I walked with a man named Joe Kazi during part of that time. And he didn't understand really what I was searching for, but he understood that what he was teaching me wasn't the right answer. Mm. And so he allowed me to keep moving, and he encouraged me to keep moving, even though he didn't understand exactly what I was doing. So the third world is that middle world, this world that we live in, where we find whatever bits of power and we bring them back to this life. And a lot of that has to go back to the story that they've already told. If they're searching for that magical, that something which is beyond them, and I'm trying to say, and I'm dealing in one of the other spaces, I may be bringing them the wrong story. Can I hear them as a healer enough to be able to see that I'm missing the point?
How does that relate to the need to know? Because in essence, you're saying that the person, Corsi, who didn't know what it was, but knew it wasn't what he was teaching, released his need to know what it was that you needed.
Yeah. And ultimately, as a healer, it's always good for us to remember that it's not primarily our job to heal the person.
No,
It's our job to help them to find healing.
that's
And
so
if I'm the purveyor of, if I'm the holder of, then often we get into spaces that are less right. But as Mary said, if I can figure out that I don't need to have the right answer, but if I can empower that other person.
I think also in history, it's the people whose stories are told is what we know about history. And one of the things, I hope I can get this right. I'm formulating in my head as I'm saying it, but it's like we have to tell our stories in order to let other people know that they're not alone, or to hear other people's stories to know you're not alone. And
yeah.
one of the things I really noticed when I was with evangelicals was they don't read anything but the Bible. Nothing. If it doesn't relate to the Bible or what they believe, they don't read it.
Yeah.
So all the novels that I read or all the books that I read and stuff that wasn't part of their repertoire. So there were all kinds of, it's like you can demonize someone if you don't know their story.
Yeah.
So by not hearing other stories, your world becomes so isolated. And at the same time, if you don't tell your story, which is one of the things this month that's really connected me with a lot of other people with the same disease I have, is we're being able to connect through Zoom and share our stories. And that's been like so helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, the hard part is that none of us can hear all the stories. And we all need something a bit more finite. So we hold on to the things that are more definitive for us. But if we're not careful, we write those into stone that they're the only definitive.
Right.
And as a healer, at least part of what you're trying to do is help people move away from some of those written in stone type of aspects of each person's life, so that they can move towards something different, something more.
I remember a time when I was struggling with something and I was telling a story over and over again of a problem that I had. And I encountered a person that would listen very carefully and ask me, tell me how your story is working for you.
Good question.
Because then I was confronted with the realities and had to admit that I was very uncomfortable and I had a story and I wanted to know how to heal it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, a piece of poetry, 2 first lines in a piece of poetry came to my mind and hit me smack in the head. And the piece of the lines are this: I laugh when I hear the fish in the water is thirsty. You don't grasp the fact that what's most alive of all is inside your own house.
Huh. Interesting.
I knew the answers. I just wasn't practicing them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking about the last chart that you put up on the screen, the going above Earth journeys, the middle journeys, and going below, ascending, descending, middle world. And a little bit of my story is that I lived with a shaman named Moonstream Eagle, and I still do some work with Tony Redhouse here in Tucson, and studied with Michael Harner. So but I can't find my drum or my rattle. I don't know where they are. So ascending, what I was taught, to the upper world, where we find our teachers or experiences upliftment, I was taught, are often done with drums and a shaman or a teacher leading us how to get above the earth to find healing. And the below earth, which I'm more proficient at leading, to find our power animals. And our power animals can change over the course of our lifetime. And then I'm not as skilled about middle world. I'll have to ask Moonstream Eagle, who's an Algonquin Indian living in Canada on her reservation. I just sent her this book so that we can dialogue and she can remind me of all these fantastic things.
And I'm glad you mentioned drum work. Why does drum work, and she talks about that in here, in the midst of the journey work. Why is drum work important? What does it do?
Brings our heart into resonance.
Right, I was just going to say the mama heartbeat.
That's right. That's right.
Bringing us into alignment.
That's right.
Sure, there are other definitions.
And what it's kind of trying to say, that remember, your heart still goes with you. That life force that you are, that vitality is still here, even as you go on a journey into a world that is different than what you've defined yourself as yet. So you're doing this ascendancy thing, or you're bringing things back into this reality world. Whichever journey you're making, that drum work reminds you that it's still you present in that, even though you're going outside of the you that you've defined up to now.
And the book reminds us that there are many vibrations, whether it's chanting or bells or drumming or rattling, that those can help us access healing, positivity, vision, our teachers, sound and vibration.
That's right. And so don't be afraid to use some of those things. Don't be afraid to be in those spaces like that. Often that allows us to be, the next point that she makes is about meditation, and specifically about lying meditation, lying down. And that's important because I love the term that she used, where she said spirit canoe.
Oh.
And that's a little bit scary to me, because essentially what she's saying is place yourself in the spirit canoe and let it float down the river. If you're laying in that spirit canoe, you haven't got control of the oars.
No.
Right? And so many of us struggle because we've been taught way too well the control of, right? Hold on to the helm, have something in the water, whatever it happens to be. And this sense of placing ourselves in the canoe and letting the canoe carry us is part of what will allow us to move beyond what we know. Because typically, if we have control of it, we go back to what we've been before, what we've done before, what we've known before. And this work is about drawing further, drawing a larger picture. And not because all of that larger picture is completely right for you, but because it shows you something that you don't typically look at. So you can maybe find more right. Does that make sense? Do you remember when someone led you on one of those types of journeys? Led you beyond yourself?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's hope. That for all of us, that's a space where if we settle into that, it becomes a hopeful space that we can be in. Here's what they talk about that we have to look at. The psyche, she said during this section, is made up of 3 parts. Logos, our inherent wisdom. Eros, our love nature, and mythos, our life dream. And what happens is that most of us tend to hold on to one side of those three. So let me just ask, how many of you are more of a logos person? You depend on your inherent wisdom, which also means the things you've learned and you know, the book knowledge you have, all of that. Or are you more of an Eros, the relationships that you've made? Or are you more of the dreaming mythos type of person? It's not that any one of those is wrong, but that you really need all three, not just one of those three. So in your life, which one of those have you emphasized best in the past? And which one are you maybe more of a deficit in? Let me put them back up there so you can see again. So which one have you learned well, and which one do you need to learn better?
Well, I'll pop in. I think I've relied more on logos over the years and in the long run. A lot of that has to do with background, situations, circumstances that took place. And I have for Eros, and I need, and I'm just saying, I think that's where I've leaned when I needed to rely on my psyche.
Yeah, yeah.
Not that I don't love nature, for goodness sake. I would rather be alone out on over in Sabino Canyon or any one of the areas around here that's so beautiful to go for a walk. And I'd like to, you know, enjoy writing down about what's possible in our lives, the mythos, the life dream. What can we do if we let go of all fear? If we can scrub away the fear that rests on our soul and in our hearts.
Yeah. And all of us use all of these to some degree. It's not like we don't. It's just we get used to using one better than, or overemphasizing one more than what it needs to be at the expense of the others.
Yes.
How about the rest of you? Which one is more inherent for you?
Oh, I'm interested in the way that I may have misread it at first. Eros doesn't say love of nature.
Right. It is not. It's the nature that we have that's relational, and moves into the love relationship with those around us.
It's a basic nature.
Yes.
Yes.
And that all three of these are inherent in all of us.
Right.
All the time. But it's hard to, I don't know if balance is even required or to be venerated. I mean, I think we just move back and forth through them.
Right. And what it may be, if you're talking to someone and they're seeking healing, is it may be because what you may need to see for them is that, well, right now it feels like you're not in the relational space, or right now you've forgotten your life dream. And so you might have to say, go back and remember this side of you.
Oh, Judy, I want to thank you because I was misreading Eros. I don't know why.
I did it too, Mary. So it's a mark of intelligence.
Here we go. Here we go. No, I really do miss having. I have a lot of mistrust from, you know, life's experiences when it comes to my love nature, which is really, I work. That's an area I need to work so hard on, is trusting people enough to love them and let them love me.
Yeah. Yeah. But life teaches us not to trust too often, way more than what we should depend on it.
Seems like, you know, the time that we're in now is challenging all three of those areas, I think.
There is no doubt.
Because it's hard to be in, you know, more direct relationship with people because we're separated. our inherent wisdom is maybe being challenged because everything is so uncertain right now. And do we dare dream of what could come after this? You know, I mean, I think that it's really, all three of those are just sort of like really challenged right now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And especially if you're honest with yourself, one or another of those is going to be especially challenged with certain people. Right? And trying to figure out how that person is pushing your buttons in a way that's not helpful to them or to you is important, right? If they're diminishing your ability to use your wisdom, your learning, that which goes before you, then you need to see that in the interaction, and both protect that and maybe even challenge why they're doing that. Right? But that often is a difficult thing to do because they're challenging that maybe because of something within them that you don't understand. Sorry, I put the wrong word here before, but now I think I got it right. Our love, relational nature. Does that work? Where it becomes more clear?
Yeah.
All right, we have just a few more minutes. We have 2 points left to go, so let me step real quickly into that. I'm sorry that I interrupted someone, but here's the, right here are the next 2 points. Cradling work and then connection to nature. Cradling work is really important because it's going back to the deepest part of you and remembering that. Speaking to your inner child, if you will, and telling yourself something that you have forgotten in this moment. So let me show you the types of things that happens in that moment. Cradling work is staying connected to the good, true, and beautiful aspects of oneself. Acknowledge the character qualities we appreciate about ourselves. Acknowledge our strengths. Acknowledge the contributions that have been made to us. Acknowledge the love given and the love received. When you look at this list, the character qualities, the strength, the contributions, the love, how many have ever forgotten some of that about yourself? How many do it on a pretty regular basis in one way or another?
Oh, sure.
Not forget, but discount.
Yeah, yeah. But one of the things that we have to do is give each other space to be able to go back and remember that. Okay? One of the easiest ways to do it is to just say something like, remember that you are a child of God. Right? Remember use some type of phrase that drives you back into the larger story about you. Because what about life steals that larger story from you? What makes you forget?
Your
One of the
ego.
things that has made a difference in my life is I was reading, I'm not in that book, Care of the Soul. I don't know if it's a Robert or Thomas More, but he talked about being gratitude and grateful for certain things. And he made a suggestion in there, in the morning when you make the bed, that inherent daily task, take the time to caress the bed and smooth it out and say how grateful you are for some place to rest.
Yes. And at least one of the reasons why through history we've taught each other to give thanks before a meal is that same type of thing. Thank you that I get to be in this space where I have the blessing of whatever is here on this plate in front of me. Right? And it reminds me of the inherent blessing and the inherent goodness of this space.
Good.
What else makes you forget besides pastors? Because my profession has often been terrible at reminding this, because we also have the task of, somebody once said our job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the
Afflict the
comfortable. We do that second really well sometimes, right? And we sometimes forget that the comforting, that remembering the underlying truth is important. What else?
Well, I think our thoughts, your thoughts are not who you are, but they certainly create your reality.
Yes.
And so we have a tendency to put too much weight on our thoughts and start believing our reality.
Yeah, especially if someone else has noted something that is not the whole of you, but they say, yeah, this thing that I see, you have a flaw here on your face. And the more you internalize that and you repeat that story, right?
That's the truth.
It becomes the truth, is right.
Yeah.
And it's not oh, go ahead, Paula.
I was going to say, I think also busyness gets in the way.
Oof, you're right.
Just all the details and stuff of life with no time to taken to reflect a little.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess that's a good lead into our very last point. The last point is that nature work. Okay, going back to nature often reminds us of a better story about life than ours. Because how many have control of the nature around you? But how many really appreciate that nature? All of that is uncontrollable. And we all do a bit of trying to control nature, right? If you have grass, you try to cut it and keep it somewhat in place. If you have trees, you try to make sure the leaves don't fall in your pool, right? All of those kinds of things. And so it's not wrong to try to control that, but it's also good for us all to know that it is larger than us.
Well, Michigan and Midland, Michigan is an example right now of the uncontrollable control, which was failing and no one paid any attention to it.
Yes, absolutely. And too much of our story in America has been one of how we have controlled all of that, right? But we've tried. What? I'm sorry. We come by all that honestly. Can I tell you why? Look how I wrote this. Connection to nature versus subdue the earth. You know where that phrase subdue the earth comes from? The very beginning of our scriptures.
I was going to say scripture.
Right at the beginning. Here, God creates and human beings are made so that they can subdue the earth. But we forget it also says, and replenish. But we definitely hold on to that subdue part. I'm supposed to control it. I'm supposed to be in charge of it. I'm supposed to put up dams that keep the water back. And we forget that we really can't. Not as well as what we think we can.
Oh, that's for sure.
And when we go back into nature, not to control it, but to find our space in it, to give us a perspective, to humble us to some degree, to get a different story, it helps us to be able to be better healers.
Yep.
Agree.
The good news is that you don't have to be a perfect healer.
Really?
Right? You just have to work as well as what you can, both with the tools, whatever they are that you have, but also in the situation, whatever it may be, and with the unperfect people that you're working with that are seeking healing. Right? Because they get to control some of this too, don't they?
Amen.
They do.
All right, you guys, thank you for being here. Next week, we step into the next aspect of all this. And so read on to the next section. If you don't have it, it's about being a visionary. And that way of the visionary is our next section.
I've been envisioning ice cream during
That's
today's
a good vision.
So So I'm going out to get some ice cream.
Well, enjoy it for all of us.
Achieve your vision.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. We'll see you later.
Thanks, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Want to say that
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
How do I get off here?